this deep dive, it takes us deep into the UK criminal underworld. With a story from the Scouse Stories YouTube channel, we've got a transcript of this guy's experience. And it's packed with everything you'd expect. Jail time, second chances, even a mysterious job in a Scottish castle. But what's really intriguing is how he navigates this world, the codes he lives by, and the unexpected twists his life takes, especially when he tries to go straight.
What's fascinating with this story is the way it pulls back the curtain on a subculture that operates largely in the shadows. The storyteller speaks in a kind of code, using slang and making assumptions about his audience's knowledge that we can unpack together.
Yeah, like right off the bat, he's throwing around terms like L and E, and I'm guessing those aren't your average multivitamins.
You're right. Those are common slang terms in this world.
Yeah.
L typically refers to marijuana, while E most likely stands for ecstasy. The way he talks about quantities, prices, even people's reactions.
Yeah.
It all lines up with the patterns of drug use and distribution we often see within these circles.
So he gets out of jail determined to turn his life around. And then this job opportunity appears out of nowhere. A job in a castle, no less. It sounds almost like a fairy tale, but you can tell from the start that things aren't quite what they seem.
Exactly. There's this constant tension between the promise of legitimacy and the undercurrent of something more sinister. The lavish setting, the all-expenses-paid trip, the emphasis on secrecy, it all sets off alarm bells.
And then he meets another Scouser, someone from Liverpool like him, who's also being deliberately vague about his background. It's like they both recognize the inherent risk involved in this supposedly above-board opportunity. What I found incredible was when he runs out of drugs and can't get more, talk about thinking on your feet, he improvises by making fake ecstasy using crushed headache pills.
It speaks to the ingenuity and desperation that these situations can create. It's a stark reminder of the lack of opportunity and the difficult choices people face when they're caught in these cycles. Making fake drugs is incredibly risky, both for the seller and the buyer. The fact that he even attempts this highlights the limited options and the desperate measures some resort to in these circumstances.
And from there, the story just spirals into this whirlwind of close calls and bad decisions, taxi chases, accidental hotel break-ins. It's like he's living in his own gangster movie.
And that's the thing about this lifestyle. It's unpredictable, volatile, and often fueled by adrenaline and poor judgment. This whole sequence really underscores the constant threat of violence, the potential for things to go wrong at any moment, and the very real consequences of operating outside the law.
What struck me was his internal conflict throughout the story. He clearly wants to go straight, but the pull of the streets, the allure of easy money, it's a powerful force.
It's that age-old dilemma, the quick reward versus the long, hard slog of building a legitimate life. And he even acknowledges that he made more money in one night selling those fake pills than he would have in a month of legitimate work. I'm curious, from your perspective, does this speak to a larger societal issue where traditional paths to success might feel inaccessible for people in certain situations?
It's a good question, and one that this story really highlights. He's faced with this choice. Try to make an honest living, but barely scrape by, or take a risk and potentially earn a significant amount, even if it means going back to a life he's trying to escape. So they arrive in Birmingham, supposedly for job training, remember? They're supposed to be on the straight and narrow now, getting legit jobs. But something about this whole setup just feels off.
And this is where the Code of the Castle really comes into play. It's not just a catchy title, it represents this unspoken set of rules, hierarchies, and expectations within this criminal network.
So you're saying there's more to it than meets the eye. This legitimate job opportunity might not be so legitimate after all.
Exactly. It's like they're being tested to see how they handle themselves, how far they're willing to go. It's about more than just skills. It's about loyalty, resilience, and a certain moral flexibility that might not align with conventional ethics.
And our storyteller, even though he's trying to go straight, seems to instinctively understand this code. Like when he meets that guy at the hotel bar who's described as a proper head.
That encounter was revealing on several levels. It shows how these networks operate. The casual drug use, the favors, exchange the way information is shared through a kind of coded language.
Yeah. And it's interesting how they seem to have mutual connections, how everyone is just 1 or 2 degrees of separation from each other in this world. It's almost like an exclusive club, but with much higher stakes.
What stands out to you about that encounter in the context of the Code of the Castle? Does it suggest that trust is a rare commodity in this world, that everyone is always looking out for themselves?
Absolutely. He's surrounded by people who are friendly on the surface, but clearly operating with their own agendas. It creates this atmosphere of constant uncertainty where you can never be sure who to trust or what their true motivations might be. And then there's this moment where he realizes he's completely out of his own stash. and those job training wages aren't going to cut it. This is where his resourcefulness takes center stage, although maybe resourcefulness isn't the right word here.
It's important to remember we're talking about illegal activities here, and there are victims involved.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the narrative, but these choices have consequences. So to make some quick cash, he decides to manufacture more fake ecstasy. This time, he gets even more creative or desperate, depending on how you look at it, with the ingredients.
And that's a critical point to remember throughout this story. This isn't a victimless crime. The decisions he's making, however understandable given his circumstances, have very real implications. What are your thoughts on the ethics of this, knowing he's essentially using unsuspecting people as guinea pigs for his homemade drugs?
It's a tough pill to swallow, no pun intended. On the one hand, you can see how desperate he is to get by, but on the other hand, he's putting people's health at risk. He gets his hands on sugar-free mints and more over-the-counter headache pills. I can't even imagine what kind of concoction he's whipping up in that hotel room.
And the risks are incredibly high. It's not just about the legal ramifications, it's about the potential for serious harm, even death, when you're dealing with substances that haven't been properly tested or regulated.
So he's putting himself out there, pushing the boundaries of this code of the castle. But there's also this sense that he's in over his head. He hits up this club that's free before 10 p.m., hoping to unload his latest batch of fake ecstasy and maybe have a good time while he's at it.
This whole club scene is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like a microcosm of the larger world he's trying to navigate, full of unspoken rules, fleeting alliances, and a constant undercurrent of risk.
And remember that guy he was supposed to meet? The one
Right.
who mentioned those little fellas? He never actually shows up. What do you make of that? Was it a test? A power play? Or maybe he just got caught up in something else?
It's a great question, and it speaks to the inherent instability of this world. There's a fragility to these connections, a sense that trust can be broken at any moment. He's constantly having to adapt, to read between the lines, and to make decisions with incomplete information.
It's like he's always one step away from disaster. But in the meantime, he's in the club, fake pills in hand, and people are actually buying them. He even does a test run with another club goer just to see if they'll notice. It's crazy risky.
It's a stark reminder that in these situations, people are often driven by desperation and a lack of viable alternatives. He's not thinking about the long-term consequences, the potential harm he's causing. He's focused on survival, on getting through the night.
Makes you wonder about the ethics of it all. He's essentially playing Russian roulette with other people's lives.
And this is where the conversation about individual choices versus systemic factors becomes really crucial. It's easy to condemn his actions, but it's also important to understand the context, the lack of opportunity, and the pressures that might lead someone to make such risky decisions.
So fueled by adrenaline and a few real pills, he manages to sell his entire stash of fake ecstasy. He even trades some for more drugs and ends up with a wad of cash. For a little while, it seems like he's on top of the world.
But it's a fleeting victory, isn't it? Because with every high, there's often an even lower low. And the come down from this one is brutal. He's high out of his mind, paranoid, and the night quickly spirals out of control.
This is where that taxi chase comes in, right? It's like
Yeah.
something straight out of a movie, a desperate escape from a bad situation that only gets worse.
And this chase scene is more than just a thrilling anecdote. It symbolizes the recklessness and the lack of foresight that often accompany this lifestyle. He's not thinking about the consequences of his actions, the potential danger he's putting himself and others in. He's purely reacting, running on instinct.
They end up sprinting through another hotel lobby, jumping fences, just trying to shake this taxi driver who's understandably upset about not getting paid. It's a miracle they made it back to their own hotel in one piece. But remember, they're supposed to be attending this job training.
It's this constant juxtaposition between the facade of legitimacy and the chaotic reality of his life. He's trying to play both sides to convince himself and everyone else that he's on the right path, but his actions tell a different story.
And this is where we see the true cost of that night. They stumble in, completely spent, lying on the floor, surrounded by empty pill packets. Not exactly the picture of professional development, is it? It's a far cry from the image of someone who's turned over a new leaf.
It highlights the unsustainable nature of this lifestyle. He can't keep outrunning his problems, his past, or the consequences of his choices.
So they're exhausted, probably still feeling the effects of whatever was in those pills. And the reality of their situation is starting to set in. What happens next?
Well, this is where the story takes an interesting turn. They're woken up abruptly, but not by the police or anyone you might expect.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Who could it be at this hour?
It's the other Scouser, the one who's been so tight-lipped about his past, and he's got news that changes everything.
So we left off with our storyteller waking up to some unexpected news from the other Scouser. What's the deal? What's going on?
This is where the layers of deception within this world truly unraveled. The other Scouser, who's been so guarded about his own past, reveals that he's not who he seems to be.
Okay. This whole thing just got a whole lot more interesting. He's been acting all mysterious this whole time. What's the truth?
He confesses that he's actually there on a mission of revenge, seeking to expose and dismantle this criminal organization from within. Remember, he's been down this road before, and it seems like he's suffered greatly because of it.
Wow. Talk about a plot twist. So this whole time, while our storyteller is trying to navigate this world, this other guy is playing a much deeper game. It's almost Shakespearean betrayal, revenge, hidden motives.
And it highlights a crucial point about the code of the castle. It's not just about loyalty to a cause or a group, it's about personal survival. In this world, alliances are fluid, and trust is a luxury few can afford.
It's like that saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But in this case, it's hard to tell who's who. What does this revelation mean for our storyteller?
It throws everything into question. The promise of a fresh start, even his perception of the other Scouser. It's all been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation.
And now he's caught in the middle of it. He's trying to distance himself from his past, but this other Scouser's vendetta threatens to pull him right back in. What happens next?
Sadly, the video ends before we find out how this all plays out. It leaves us with a lingering sense of uncertainty, wondering about the choices he'll make and the paths available to him. But that ambiguity speaks to a larger truth. Escaping this world, breaking free from its grip, is far more complex than it seems.
It's almost as if the storyteller is right back where he started. He's out of jail, but he's still trapped, both by his circumstances and by the allure of this life. It's a cycle that's difficult to break free from.
And that's the most powerful takeaway from this deep dive. The code of the castle, with its unspoken rules and hierarchies, isn't just about a specific criminal network. It represents a system, a way of life that perpetuates these cycles of crime and poverty.
It's a system where the odds are stacked against you, where survival often means compromising your morals and making difficult choices. We're left to ponder if he'll succumb to the pressures of that world or find a different path. This story doesn't offer easy answers, but it does leave us with a deeper understanding of the complexities and the human cost of this hidden world.
It reminds us that everyone has a story, that even within the criminal underworld there are shades of gray. It challenges us to look beyond the stereotypes and to recognize the systemic factors that contribute to these cycles of crime and poverty.
So what can we take away from this deep dive? It's been a journey into a world most of us will never experience firsthand, full of unexpected twists, moral dilemmas, and a constant struggle for survival. This story stayed with me long after I first heard it, and I hope it has the same impact on you. What surprised you? What stayed with you? And what do you think happened next?
This deep dive reminds us that even in the darkest corners of society, there are glimmers of humanity, resilience, and a longing for something better.
The code of the castle may be a fictional construct, but the challenges it highlights, the choices it forces us to confront those are very real. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Hopefully you learned something new, gained a fresh perspective, and maybe even had a few aha moments along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep seeking out those hidden stories that remind us of the complexities of the human experience.